So thank you very much for joining us today. This is Dr. Sean Yoder, and today we're doing Chapter 17 of Macroeconomics. So today is a little different in terms of economics. We're going to go through some of the intellectual family tree of macroeconomics, because not all macroeconomists are the same. So we're going to look at some of the different major schools, kind of what they're thinking about, what makes them unique from others. So the family tree for macroeconomics looks something like this. John Maynard Keynes, right here, is considered the father of modern macroeconomics. And this, basically everything over here is kind of considered mainstream macro, but please understand that is not all of it. You do have the Austrian school over here, and you end up with some very interesting things out of the Austrian school. That said, I generally focus on modern mainstream. Why? Because that's what the policymakers are doing. So for a 202 class, I tend to focus on this side. Now, before Keynes, the major school of macroeconomics was this guy, Jean-Baptiste Say, who is known for something called Say's Law. Now, Say's Law basically is field of dreams. Build it and they will come. If there's a macroeconomic problem, we need to focus on supply. Just get people making stuff. Encourage businesses. Just let them make stuff. Make stuff, make stuff, make stuff, and eventually everything's great. Jean Maynard Keynes, after the Great Depression, took Say's Law and flipped it on its head. Jean Maynard Keynes said, it doesn't matter what you make if nobody wants it. Now, John Maynard Keynes' text, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, quite honestly, yes, it's very important, but honestly, it is the most horrible book ever to read. The ideas are scattered, it needs editing, it's an absolute pain. So I don't require it of you. But the key idea under Keynesian ideas is that it's demand that drives the economy. Now, recently the phrase Keynesian is pejorative. If you hear people say, oh, you're a Keynesian, they usually mean it as an insult, and they mean it usually as a synonymous term for Democrat or liberal. But this is a relatively new thing, because the great liberal Richard Nixon, hint, hint, he wasn't a liberal, said, and I quote, "We are all Keynesians now," end quote. So as late as the late 1970s, Keynesian economics was the predominant major school of macroeconomics. And there was an understanding that as long as you're a larger country like the United States, generally speaking, demand is what drives the economy. Now, Keynesian economics breaks for smaller countries or individual states. Most individual states can't do their own fiscal policy. And it breaks if you are, like Ireland, really, really open to trade. The heart of Keynesian economics was this. If there's a recession because people aren't demanding enough, government could step in to fill the gap. And eventually, the economy recovers. Now, that's great. Keynesian economics is very good at telling you what to do when life sucks. If you have high inflation, the government should cut spending and raise taxes, slow it down, slow down the economy, and eventually your high inflation will get back under control. If you have high unemployment and people are suffering, the government should spend more and cut taxes. Again, notice Keynesians advocate to cut taxes. And that will increase demand, and away you go. So Keynes is very good at telling you what to do when life sucks. The problem with Keynes's ideas is Keynes had no way of saying how to avoid the suck. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm highly motivated to not be in sucky positions to begin with. I mean, it's good to know what to do when things go absolutely horrible. But how about let's avoid the suck? And in comes Milton Friedman, University of Chicago. Keynes could not answer, Keynesianism could not answer what caused the Great Depression. The best Keynes had was called animal spirits. This is where we get the bull and the bear for Wall Street. Or to put it another way, everybody just woke up crazy one day. You know, everybody was just snitty on the same day, and that just destroyed the economy. Wasn't very satisfying to me. So Milton Friedman, University of Chicago, he was a total gentleman. He was the nicest, he was smart as sin, amazingly smart, wicked smart, but gentle at the same time. Milton Friedman got the Nobel for one thing. He was able to show that there was a monetary phenomenon before the Great Depression. Or to put it another way, the Great Depression was partly caused by issues with the money supply. So herein we get this idea of velocity. Now, we talked about velocity last time when we did money demand. Velocity in the abstract is the number of times a dollar bill changes hands. Now, in its definition, they use nominal GDP, the stock of money, to measure it. Now, notice this is 3 bar. Again, a 3 bar means you're not allowed to argue about it. This is definitional, okay? So this is the definition of velocity. However, a pure macroeconomist, a pure theorist of velocity has a problem with this definition. Even though it's 3 bar, I'm going to ignore the 3 bar and I'm going to argue with it. Velocity is the number of times a dollar bill changes hands. So this is nominal GDP, the total number of nominal GDP divided by the money supply, because the money has to change hands for each of these transactions. Okay, fine. But does money only change hands if it's counted in GDP? Think about it. If somebody buys my spit-infused, encrusted Nintendo Entertainment System, you know, the Duck Hunt and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and my Battletoads, right? If they buy that on eBay, that transaction does not count in GDP, but yet money's changing hands. It should count in velocity. So technically, that shouldn't be real GDP. That should be all transactions here. Problem is, we have no way of measuring all transactions. If I pay the neighbor $5, the neighbor's kid $5 to mow my lawn, that doesn't get recorded anywhere, but yet that's a change in velocity. So understand, part of the reason why this is 3-barred here is we're forced into this because that's all we can measure. So if you rearrange this equation, you end up with the money supply times velocity is equal to price times real GDP or nominal GDP. This equation is known as the quantity theory of money. Now, pure monetarists assume velocity is constant. I'm going to show you, we've already seen graphs where velocity was bumping up and down and giving early warning signs to recession, so we know it's not. But this equation is kind of interesting. Money times velocity is equal to nominal GDP. So herein, you get this interesting distinction. If velocity is not moving, let's assume for a moment velocity is not moving. You put a bar over it. An increase in the money supply means this left side of this equal sign is going up. That means the right-hand side has to go up. And herein we get to the idea of sticky prices. In the short run, prices are sticky. This shoots up. But in the long run, things revert. So imagine this. Imagine we're sitting in the classroom. Yeah, I'm sorry, you got to look at me. Yeah, well, there are pluses and minuses. And okay. Right? And the Federal Reserve sends these huge Black Hawk helicopters to hover over the campus, right over some of the athletic fields. And inside the Black Hawk, they have tons of freshly printed $100 bills. And they just take these in garbage bags. And they just take these garbage bags, they rip them open, and shove $100 bills out of these, one after another onto the field. Right? So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, I'm not even going to bother saying class is dismissed because we're just going to run. Right? We all go run out to the athletic field, and we're stuffing every pocket, everything we have full of money, all of our bags, right? We're stuffing full of money. I'm taking my sweatshirt off, tying the ends, trying to make it a bag so I can stuff it more full, right? We walk around, I'm tying, you know how you do your pant cuff legs so that they're really tight against your skin. So I'm walking around like the big marshmallow, stuff full of cash, right? Okay. So we're all instant millionaires, if not billionaires. Now, in the short run, what's going to happen to the sales? Hold on one sec. Sorry about that. So in the short run, what's going to happen to the sales of cars, televisions, game consoles, consumer electronics in this area? Right? It's going to shoot up. We're going to see a pop in real GDP. Are prices going to change in the short run? No, probably not. But as the houses start buying up, as the car, what's going to happen in 6 months to a year as we start to get closer along? Well, we're probably going to have the same number of housing sales and car sales as we did before the money got dropped. After an initial pop, but stuff's probably just going to start costing more. The housing prices are probably going to shoot up. Cars are probably going to cost a bit more if you buy them here. That's the idea. Now, is velocity constant? No. Velocity can go up or down. But this is the use of the quantity theory of money. The idea is if the money supply goes up, eventually it'll translate into inflation in the economy. So here's velocity from 1960 to 2017. If the monetarists were right, this would be a straight horizontal line. Clearly it's not. But does that mean that the monetarists are completely bunk? No, they do have a point. So traditionally what ended up happening is monetarists were skeptical of the Fed's ability to manage the economy, and they were skeptical of government intervention. So monetarists ended up being the anti-government types, and then Keynesians became the more advocated monetary and fiscal policy tools. And so you ended up with kind of some natural intellectual homes between Keynesians and monetarists. For the most part, these are the two major schools in macroeconomics, the Keynesians and the monetarists. Now, there are other schools, and I'm going to talk about some of them. But the other schools are kind of niche and have their place, but they're not overall macro views. They tend to focus on one thing or another. In the late 70s, early 80s, you ended up with this group called the supply side guys. Now, the supply side economists have some points. And there is one major idea of the supply side economists that it is controversial, but it has some pieces to it, some intellectual pieces to it that make sense. I don't like the way Professor Fair and Professor Case worked this up. So I'm going to do it for you. And it has to do with this idea of the Laffer curve. So ignore this. I'm going to redo the presentation because I don't think your textbook authors were fully fair on this. So here I'm going to put tax rate. We're going to assume it's an income tax, a tax rate. Here's 0% tax at the origin and 100% tax. And this is government revenue, how much revenue the government actually gets from taxing. So government revenue is equal to the tax rate times what's called the tax base or the economic activity. So if you tax at 0%, how much government revenue are you going to get? 0. 0 times any number is 0. Gee, I know that's profound. But here's where Professor Laffer had another insight. There's also a dot here at 100% and 0. Think about it. Are you going to go to work for no paycheck? Are you going to get up each morning and go to work so that the government taxes all your money and you get absolutely no paycheck? Me either. So there's this inverted U shape that occurs, the government revenue. Now, I deliberately drew this inverted U asymmetric because as best we can tell it is asymmetric. But this inverted U shape has some interesting features to it. First of all, there's a theoretical maximum level of government revenue. And if you're spending above that theoretical maximum, you're never going to be able to balance your budget. Okay? Secondly, I drew this vertical line in between the maximum of the Laffer curve. So if you needed to raise government revenue for something, I don't care what you want to spend it on. Could be for social programs, could be for education, could be for national defense. Doesn't matter, not the point of this exercise. Should you cut or raise taxes? Well, if you're here at that point, you should raise taxes. But if you're here, you should cut taxes. But herein is the peril. Let me grab the marker here. If you're at that point and you raise taxes too much, let's say you raise them to there, you could actually end up with less government revenue. But the inverse is also true, which the former governor of Kansas just figured out. He wanted to cut taxes, and the Laffer curve effect would be great, and then he could fund the school. Yeah, he cut it down here. And the Republican legislature in Kansas overrode the veto when they had to put the taxes back up to fund the roads and the schools. But whether you cut or raise taxes depends on which side of the curve you're on. And sometimes you'll be listening to Ways and Means Committee hearings in the House where they have to do the budget, or finance and budget committees in the Senate. And they will ask experts, they're testifying at the committee, which side of the Laffer curve are we on? We're on the left or the right? Now, that's an empirical question, whether we're on the left or the right. That is empirically answerable. But I want you to understand, you could live in different realities. Some states could be over here. Other states could be over here. people could have different views of this. While it is an empirical question for a country, in a diverse country as the United States, you could have states at different points on this. So did you know policy wonks and people with political agendas like to pay video game makers to embed their ideas in video games? So generations of people grow up thinking that their ideas are the way life is. You know that? SimCity is one of them. The old SimCity, way back, 1990s version, had the Laffer curve built into it. You could set the tax rate. If the taxes were low, more people would move in, but you didn't end up with enough government revenue to support it. If the taxes were too high, people would move out and you'd have less government revenue. SimCity had a Laffer curve built into it. So next time you're playing video games, think to yourself, does the video game maker have, do the people who write the code for this, they have a political agenda or some kind of ideological agenda? You might be surprised what you come up with. So if we were in class, if we were in physical class, I would be doing an experiment right now with the class. So imagine yourself sitting in a large lecture hall. Imagine 50 to 100 people in there with you. And I'm at the front. I said, okay, stand up if you have a job. A certain number of people stand up, right? I said, okay, stay standing. Now, those of you who have a job, sit down if you want more hours than what you're working. If your boss came to you and said, hey, would you work some more hours, you would take those more hours. If you would be willing to accept more hours of work, sit down. Okay? So a certain number of people sit down, there are a few more standing. Now, for those of you who are standing, these are the people who are working as much as they want right now. I'm going to assume you're in a 15% tax bracket. I'm going to cut your taxes by 10%. So you're going to go from 15% to 13.5%. Okay. So that's a 1.5% extra back. So for every $1,000 you earn, you get an extra 15 bucks. Now, the people standing, you are the people who are working as much as you want right now. If I gave you an extra 15 bucks for every 1,000 you earn, you do the math as to how many hours that would be. But after you earn $1,000, I'll give you an extra 15 bucks. How many of you would work more for that? If you would work more, stay standing, the rest of you sit. Some sit, some stand. And I look at those that are standing. I said, I cut taxes by 10%. Now, if there's not more than 10% of the people in the room standing, there were 100 people, there'd be 10 people remaining standing at the end. If there's fewer than 10, you're on the left side of the Laffer curve for that ring. If there's more than 10, then you're on the right side of the Laffer curve for that ring. So we did some analysis of the tax cuts in the 1980s. Yes, the supply of labor did modestly go up. There were some people who were willing to work more. But it did not offset the depth of the cut. So in July 2019, I need to update this. There was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Now, the majority of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 was in the corporate income tax side. The majority of the tax rate came on the corporate income tax side. So I did a test trying to see, did the tax cuts help revenue or did they hurt revenue? And what happened? The data shows at least as of July 2019. I need to update this for 2020, but let's be honest, we've got a COVID world. I'm not sure the COVID world's going to be that. I could probably update it through January or February 2020, but the summer 2020 I don't think is a fair comparison on it intellectually. But it looks like it implies the corporate taxes, the companies are on the left side of the Laffer curve. Notice this is an empirical question. I don't really think it's fair to include the COVID stuff. I don't. So it might be 2021, 2022 before I could fully run this test. But this is some of the research that I've done, trying to figure out where corporations are around the left or the right. Another school, so you've got Keynesians, you've got monetarists, we've talked about supply-siders. Another school is known as the Lucas School, or the rational expectation guys. The rational expectation guys use this. This is called an implicit form. Economists use this when we really don't know exactly how it works. But this is the Lucas function, and the idea goes something like this. This says GDP, real GDP, is related somehow, but we don't know exactly how, to what the inflation rate is minus what you think it is. So this is the price surprise or the shock. If inflation is far less than what you think it is, GDP is going to react one way to it, or if inflation is way higher than you think it is, GDP is going to react a different way. Rational expectations and these kind of ideas are embedded in finance a lot. So for those of you who go on to business finance, stocks, bonds, portfolio management, you're going to be enjoying the rational expectations school quite thoroughly. There's other schools. You get the real business guys, the real business cycle. So it talks about price and wage flexibility and tries to explain the business cycle, and it emphasizes shocks of technology and these kind of things. You get the new Keynesians. New Keynesians. What are new Keynesians? New Keynesians are just like old Keynesians. They just focus on sticky prices and wages, and they add a little bit of expectations. New name, same friendly service. New Keynesians are very similar to old Keynesians. New Keynesians just have been a little better at dealing with the criticisms of the old Keynesian school, but they're still Keynesians. Who's going to do? You get behavioral macro as well, that focuses on psychology and sociology into the way people make decisions. Why are prices sticky? Why are wages sticky? What is causing this psychologically? And some of this comes down to hyperbolic discounting. So for those of you who have had business and have done present value metrics, you usually discount at the interest rate of the treasury or some interest rate. But what if the discounting is hyperbolic? Immediate gratification, even slightly deferred. There you go. You have behavioral macro. The problem with all these different macro models, from the Keynesians to the monetarists, to the supply side guys, to the Lucas School, these are hard to standardize. What tends to happen in macroeconomics is something happens, Great Depression, we get a model that describes that. Then we get the tequila crisis, we get a model for that. Then we get the Thai baht crisis, something that. Then we get the Great Recession. And you get all these different models, but they're hard to standardize. And without standardizing all the models, it's hard to test one against the other to see which outperforms. And the reality is we have a small amount of data. Why? Because generally in macroeconomics, you want 10-year averages. So the United States going back to 1776, we've got coming up on 250 years, so it's 25 observations for the United States. It's not a lot of data to use. And when you start adding other countries, all the variances in the policy regimes and everything else, it's very, very difficult. So when you hear about a macroeconomist, realize they come from different schools, and the different schools can be reflected in political points of view or in political policies that they may or may not advocate. Are they crazy? Well, they have to be a little crazy. They're an economist. But each of them has a point, and their point makes sense from a certain perspective at a certain time. But remember, nobody has a monopoly on the truth. Each of the schools of macroeconomic work in certain circumstances and explain certain things. And we do not have a master theory that explains everything at all times. So when you're dealing with macroeconomics, having a half an ounce of humility when you talk about it and remembering that we at this point do not have something that works for everything can be helpful. So thank you very much for listening. Good luck on your second exam. Please give me a call or drop into office hours if you need, and I'll be glad to talk with you and help you get started. Take care.